my name is Fendi and this is Pancho, and we are going to go on a virtual weed walk at the dog park. Some non-native species establish themselves with aggression that wreaks havoc on the local ecosystems and costs communities millions of dollars each year. Over the past few centuries, people have intentionally and unintentionally spread around species of plants and animals all over the world. Sometimes these species can cause unintended negative consequences to the native environment, to our ability to recreate, to our agricultural practices, and even to our health. Did you know that it is illegal to have weeds? And no, I'm not talking about marijuana, I'm talking about noxious weeds. Colorado classifies noxious weeds into 3 lists. List A are species that are not well established in the state. So it is our duty as citizens and as people that recreate and enjoy nature to get rid of them as soon as we can and as early as possible. Conversely, species that are on list C are really well established throughout the entire state. So you can find them in almost every county, we'll say. And there's really not much that we can do at this point to try to get them completely out of the state or eradicated. And in the middle is list B species, which they're getting fairly well established, but we're still trying really hard to manage them and eradicate them the best we can with several different methods. So here we have some leafy spurge. The Latin name for this is Euphorbia isula, and it is a list B species. You can identify this plant by these neon green flowers that it has, and it's got some really slender alternate leaves. One of these plants can produce up to 130,000 seeds. That is just mind-blowing. And they grow really, really deep roots. So their roots can actually get up to 30 feet deep, but they're typically around 10 feet deep. The seeds are also viable in the soil for anywhere from 5 to 8 years. These flowers produce a capsule that with warm weather ejects the seeds almost 15 feet away from the original plant. These plants also produce their own herbicide. They have these compounds that are called allelopathic compounds, and they prevent other plants from growing around them. It's pretty impressive, but is also another characteristic that makes it a very aggressive noxious weed. So leafy spurge has a milky sap in it that is really irritating to the GI tract and to our skin. And it's especially irritating to the GI tract of lots of native wildlife and to cattle. So when you're pulling this plant, make sure that you are wearing gloves, because this stuff could possibly give you a rash. And your dogs. looking at some common teasel. The Latin name is Dipsacus fulonum, and it is a list B species. These guys can get over 6 feet tall. If you'll notice, that one right there is a little taller than I am, and I am about 5 feet tall. These plants are covered in prickles, so they're spiny. They're not fun to touch. And a single one of these plants can produce up to 2,000 seeds. So what you're seeing here is last year's seed production, last year's flowers. These plants are biennial, meaning that they typically take 2 years to finish their life cycles. The first year, they start out as a basal rosette, which you will see down there. And the second year, they shoot up the flowering stalk and produce flowers, which ultimately produce seed. These seeds can stay viable for up to 14 years in the soil. And, as you can see, they're bothersome to dogs. And here we have some Scotch thistle. Latin name is Onoportium acanthium, and it is a list B species. It starts out by growing this basal rosette, and these leaves are completely covered in spines. These rosettes can be up to 5 feet across. That's as long as I am tall. There are stories that when the Vikings tried to invade Scotland, it repelled their invasion. One of these plants can produce up to 40,000 seeds per plant, and these seeds are viable in the soil for up to 20 years. Oh, and looky here, we have some leafy spurge. Weeds do not care about fences, which is why we all need to play our part and act like good neighbors and take care of our personal properties so that they don't spread to other people's properties and to open spaces and natural areas and cause detrimental harm. So over here, we have a Russian olive. The Latin name is Elaeagnus angustifolia, and it is a list B species. This is actually a fairly common tree in a lot of neighborhoods here in this area because it used to be planted as a windbreak. And eventually we realized that it's actually doing more harm than good. This tree has seeds on it that resemble olives, which is why it's called a Russian olive. And these seeds have like a grayish color. And they are dispersed by birds, making it problematic. Because if you have one of these in your yard, you get birds coming into your yard, eating them, and then moving them to new places they establish, and it makes the management for them really, really difficult. So these trees are typically found in riparian areas, so next to streams, creeks, rivers, and they compete with the native trees and the native shrubs for water. They uptake a lot of water, and they're shade tolerant, making them easier to establish themselves. So if you have one of these in your yard, you should cut it down and you should use it for firewood. Hey, Pancho, you need to get away from there. That plant right there is poisonous. So now we're looking at some poison hemlock. The Latin name is Conium maculatum, and it is a list C species. So poison hemlock has these leaves that resemble carrot leaves. They're in the same family as carrots, Apiaceae. And they have hollow stems, and their stems have these really distinct purple dots on them. And you can see some of the purple dots from this. This is from last year. So this was the plant that Socrates was sentenced to consume in a poisonous beverage after being found guilty of corrupting the youth with his asking of philosophic questions. If you look at the stalk of this plant, you can see that it's covered in those purplish reddish dots or splotches. And these are now known as the blood of Socrates. So here are the flowers from last year, and they grow in these umbels. So all of these flowers are coming out of the same point on the end of this stalk here. And the flowers are white. Please take precaution with your children, as there have been cases where kids break off the branches of these plants and play with them like they were straws or maybe whistles, because they are hollow. And make sure that your dogs don't eat them either. These invaders directly affect each one of our lives in a very impactful way. They affect the native ecosystems that we recreate in. They cause damage to our water supply. They cause damage to our crop production and minimize the amount of forage that's available to livestock. So they're directly impacting our food source. And they can affect us really personally by causing harm to our dogs or to our kids. Take poison hemlock as an example. And each one of us has a very important role that we can play in eradicating them. It's all about being proactive instead of reactive. It's early detection and rapid response. So as soon as you recognize any of these species that we have gone over, or any of the other species that are on the Colorado noxious weed lists, do your part and eradicate them as soon as possible. We don't want them to cause any more negative consequences than we already have to deal with. And if we act as a collective, we can put up a serious fight against these invaders.